Hey everyone, Mekkah here, and today we're doing a Bow Knight tier list. I'm ranking all the Bow Knights, Bow Cavaliers, Horsemen, Rangers, etc. in the Fire Emblem series. I thought I was done with these archetype tier lists back when I did the lore tier lists. Turns out I was wrong, there was at least one more archetype left. If it turns out there's any other ones I forgot, feel free to let me know down below. I have a whole playlist of these if you need a reminder of which ones I've done. So I'm going to be ranking these based on how good they are in my opinion, and that opinion is going to be a mix of efficient and casual context opinions. The efficiency, I think, is necessary to factor in to set a bar for units to clear, make units more distinct from one another, but I don't want to leave out the more casual perspective, especially since there's a couple units here that I think really stand out and really highlight the difference between what an efficient player tends to think of characters or units and what a casual player tends to think. But if you let go of that idea that you have to be super efficient, then some of these characters get a lot better, and I don't want to just leave that out of a video that's really just intended to be for fun. So don't take it too seriously. In the top right corner, you can see someone trying to train Wrath to level 20 Nomad Trooper as fast as possible while beating FE7. This is footage of a wheel percent race that I did against Raisins a while ago. If you've not seen that yet, you can check that out. Link should be in the description, or just search Wrath percent or wheel percent Wrath and you'll find it. If you have seen it, then feel free to try and guess if it's me or Raisins playing. Now you can see in the bottom row here, half of this is taken up by Wolf and Setgar from their various iterations. And then we have Medir, Lester, Robert, Selfina, Sue, Shin, or Sin, Wrath, Hayden from the Sacred Stones, you might not have seen him a whole lot, Astrid from both of her iterations, and Fogado, who I almost forgot, shame on me. I only included characters that start out with a bow on a horse. That was pretty much my only criteria. The horse cannot fly, so no Reina here, I'm afraid. I was gonna do Yukimura, I think how his name is pronounced, but he's not classified as a horse unit, so I felt justified leaving him out. So just these today. The other ones I couldn't really fit into this box, I'm afraid. So let's start off with Wolf and Setgar. I might as well just get him out of the way. It looks like we're gonna be here a while, but most of these are very similar, so I wouldn't be too worried too much that this is gonna be a Wolf and Setgar feature-length video. So the FE1 ones are pretty bad. There's no other way to go about it. They probably do have their uses. The way I used them, the one time I went through FE1 on a casual playthrough, was I used them for convoy fodder. The way the convoy works in FE1 is very different from other games. You cannot trade items and preparations, and even during battle, you can't swap items around instead a unit can just give an item to someone else. And also, because of all that, you kind of want to deploy units sometimes just for the sake of getting stuff out of the convoy and giving them to other characters. And so that's what I would make them do, because they have high mobility. So if someone is on the front lines and they're running out of weapons, at least they're there to bring some more silver swords or something. That's pretty much all I use them for. They're pretty trash in combat. They are pre-promoted, technically, but FE1 doesn't really care. The XP gain that you get from hitting enemies or killing enemies just depends on how much XP an enemy is worth, period. It doesn't get modified by the difference in your level or anything like that. So if an enemy is worth 34 XP, you're just going to get 34 XP. So in that sense, they're not held back, but their growths are pretty trash, and their bases are pretty much just the Horseman class bases. Horseman is what this class is called back in those days. So they're pretty bad. I think there is room for units to be worse than them. There is worse things than starting out as a mounted unit with the ability to just chip enemies with a bow. They don't use swords, unlike in, say, Shadow Dragon or any of the Rangers or anything like that. They only have bows, and they're not great at it. They're basically supposed to be a promoted version of the, what's it called, Castor's class, the Hunter class, but I don't think they actually promote into that in this game. But yeah, I think they're D tier, not very good. I do want to leave room for some units that are truly trash in Shadow Dragon. I do believe there's worse units. I couldn't really think of any at the top of my head, but they're not very good. FE3 versions aren't a whole lot different. The biggest difference between these and the FE3 versions, I think, is that the FE3 ones, I guess Caster can promote into Horseman now, that doesn't really matter. I think the biggest difference is that they have to dismount indoors, so you get a weaker version of them in indoor maps, which makes them even worse in my opinion. I don't think that there's anything about them that redeems them. However, me putting them in D tier doesn't mean they're unsalvageable. You can make these units good, because stat boosters in both FE1 and FE3 are massively powerful. So if you feel like using them, if you like their hairdos or, you know, how similar their portraits are, don't feel bad about doing so, because you can definitely just give them enough favoritism to get by. They're just not very good compared to the other characters in the game, or even the other Bow Knights that we're ranking here. So that's the early Fire Emblems covered. Let's move on to Shadow Dragon. These portraits look pretty much the same, but I think you guys will manage to tell them apart by their placings. The Shadow Dragon ones are the standout ones. Those are actually really good for casual playthroughs, because for some reason only these two got these massive growth bonuses to them. I looked them up on Veil earlier. They're like over 100% HP, and Wolf has like a 100% strength growth as a horseman. Sedgar has like 85% growth as a general in defense. I think Wolf is like 65%. They're insane. And back when Shadow Dragon was a newer farm, like it was just released, and people found out that they had these growths, people were like, wow, so this is the way you're supposed to beat Hard 5. I think it's pretty likely that the developers intended for these to be cheese outs to Hard 5. Now, as the fandom got better at Fire Emblem, usually characters that focus on high durability tends to be very good early on when the meta is when the game is very new, when it's harder to figure out exactly how to beat the game. And as people get more knowledge about the game, the defense tends to fall off in uselessness and offense tends to be preferred. And so Sedgar and Wolf became less considered like an S+++ kind of tier unit. And it turns out that faster playthroughs don't have to bother raising up a really strong Wolf or Sedgar to beat the game. And instead there was more of a focus on offensive ideas, like Sita with the Wing Spear, forcing that to get one-hit KOs instead of turtling behind a General Sedgar destroying everything. But to this day, you can still open up a Shadow Dragon game, reclass Sedgar into a General, warp him to a fort in that port chapter, chapter 8, and he won't take 0 damage from the Cavaliers there, but he'll take little enough that you can heal him with a couple of vulneraries, and every 10 attacks or so, he will get a level up, and he'll get 1, maybe 2 defense if he's lucky. Definitely get 2 HP every now and then, and just slowly turn into an unkillable tank. And by slowly, I mean, you can skip and you can like spam enter in those chapters and it will go by pretty quickly. So in terms of time investment, it's really not all that bad, and it's a great option to make Hard 5 more bearable if you're having trouble. It's not necessary, but it's really, really good as a cheese option. If you're talking about a more efficient context, then this kind of strategy is not very viable. You want to spend your warps getting Marth to a gate, and you want to, not bother with this kind of maneuver. You want to be offensive about everything. And General Sedgar, he's really good, but he's not an offensive powerhouse until he gets a lot of speed. Same goes for Wolf. They're pretty much the same unit with some minor differences. I think the biggest difference is that Wolf has better strength. One of them is a higher level, and as a result, he's like slightly higher basis, but it really isn't a very big difference. So I'm treating them as like one of the same. But, just to give you an idea, I looked at an efficiency tier list by Pala Emblem discussed in the efficiency Discord, and they're pretty much, I think everyone agreed that they were roughly B tier there. And it was kind of the ranking I was going to put them in anyway, because I think they're S+++ for people who just want to beat Hard 5 the easiest way possible. But if you're being a bit more efficient about it, then they're probably more like B or C tier. There's a couple things you can do with a promoted unit early on that unpromoted units just cannot match. They're in a class set that doesn't really have amazing classes like Wyvern Knight or Paladin or Sniper or Swordmaster even, but they do have access to horsemanship from afar. General, even if you don't train them all the way, can choke some points. They can do some range attacks with the bow and still be sort of safe. There's like weird things you can do in Chapter 6 with a General, even if they're not, massive defense general. So they have stuff to do. It's just not super significant, so we'll throw them in B tier for now. They're pretty fine, and I think I gotta respect just how bonkers they are if you're not going about it the fastest way possible. Now, the FE12 versions, they look the exact same, like maybe slightly more saturated portraits if I look very closely. I think saturated is the word I'm looking for. But the FE12 versions, they only join in chapter 19, I want to say, one chapter before you fight Harden, and their bases are not very good for their join time. They were only added in FE12, they were not around in FE3, so we don't have to do any Book 1, Book 2 shenanigans, but they are in the remake of Book 2. And recruiting them alone is a pretty big hassle. I think the way most people want to play that map on higher difficulties, if they don't want to deal with the hardest recruitment possible, is just to kill the boss as soon as possible. And this will stop all reinforcements on the map for the rest of the map. And one of the reinforcements is Violent, who is the one who recruits Wolf, who is the one who recruits Sedgar. So you lock yourself out of recruiting these two characters if you do that. But at the same time, I think the map's design around recruiting these characters is very interesting, so I would recommend everyone to try and go through it at least once, just like with Xavier in FE5. It is very interesting, but the reward you get is really not very good. These two do not have great bases for their join time. FE12 has a free reclassing system, and it's even more free than it is in Shadow Dragon, the game before this. So you can reclass them to Sniper if you want to this time, or you can go Swordmaster or anything you want. Sniper is probably the most viable option. I have seen a funny 0% growth run by a channel called KBM Studios, where I think Wolf was used for, I want to say, the rest of the game after he was recruited. Might have been like one less chapter than the rest of the game, but for most of it he was deployed to do some funny stuff. I don't count that very highly, but it is funny to like imagine that even in the context where FE12's super inflated growths aren't around to help characters that are not Setgar and Wolf, they still don't end up doing a whole lot. They were just like, I think it was just Wolf doing like 1 or 2 things for a couple chapters. But I wanted to give him a shout out because there's not a whole lot of else notable about them. Like, they have a high bow rank, so you can go sniper and have 8 bows, I think, and then snipe stuff. But there are several other characters that can do that, and it's not a super high in demand thing. Usually you have a trained bow user anyway who can do that, so it doesn't add too much, but it's there. But I think for the purpose of this list, I think I can put him in E. They're pretty bad. I can put him in D2 because there are some characters I would maybe put in E. Yeah, sure, we'll throw them in E for now. They're really underwhelming, but they sure do exist. Now, that's a little bit depressing, so let's do a palette cleanser here with Midir and Lester from FE4 Gen 1 and 2. Midir is very cool because his stats look like Garbo. His first impression is getting killed by an enemy with a hand axe, which is about the most humiliating thing that can happen to you in FE4. But when you get him, he's actually quite good, just because the BOWNAGE class can Canto after doing anything in this game, and that gives him a bit more flexibility and safety. I think the whole hit and run aspects of BOWNAGE with Canto in FE4 is a little overstated, because if you look at how big the maps are and how big the enemy ranges are, especially when you're fighting near road tiles, it's pretty hard for Midir to hit something and then hide in safety. You have to kind of build your formation around it still, which is not too different from what you have to do with bow users in other games. So I generally don't feel like the hit and run aspect of Midir is that great, but when it comes in handy, it does come in super handy. It feels good to use, and because Midir is mounted and has pursuit, he automatically is one of the better units in FE4 Gen 1, at least until you get a bunch of viable alternatives. I do feel like Midir is at his peak in the prologue, chapter 1, chapter 2-ish. He can buy the killer bow from Jamka to start with chapter 2, which I think you should do because it's hard for Jamka to get to any combat in chapter 2 when it really matters, which is the early parts of it. So having Midir have it's like an 8% chance or something to get a crit every now and then is nice. Really what the killer bow does for him is it fixes his accuracy. Iron bow is the worst weapon they've ever made in FE4. It has absolute garbage stats, and the killer bow is an improvement in every single way, but especially in accuracy. So having that there to use that is super nice. So Midir's pretty good. I would say he goes in like B tier or so. I made a tier list beforehand to like check against, just to make sure I'm not making any outrageous mistakes, which I'm sure I am still, and you're free to point them out in the comments. I don't think... Obviously, Setgar and Wolf are better in a super casual context. Midir is way better for efficiency players. Oh, my bottom of my list is showing. That's not good. Let me get rid of that. Oop, get out of here. They're not as dominant, but for efficiency players, Midir probably does a lot more than Setgar and Wolf. Midir shows up throughout like all of Gen 1, I think, for efficiency playthroughs. Where Setgar and Wolf kind of just do 1 or 2 things, and that's that. But yeah, I like Midir a lot. The highlight, I think, for Midir is usually... the boss on the chapter 1 castle that has Ira guarding it, because you want Sigurd to kill that warrior and then seize instantly, but it's kind of hard to get someone else in range to do that, or to help him with that, because he doesn't one-round that warrior. And so what you can do with Sigurd is you have Midir chip the guy from a safe distance, and this is something that Finn and Kwan have a bit more trouble doing, because hitting that guy with a javelin is kind of tricky with the weapon triangle disadvantage and the weapon having Garbo accuracy. If they have enough movement, they could probably get in one range, but then they're still dealing with all those problems minus the javelin. The steel lance isn't going to be a whole lot better. So Midir has a nice little niche there, I think. So that's pretty good. But then even throughout chapter 2, just having the Killer chip is nice. Now, Midir can be paired with Aideen, and then you would get a really good Lester. And Lester, when you have Midir as his dad, or even if you have Jamka as his dad, with the pursuit ring being passed down to him, is, I think, again, for casual players, quite good. It's really hard to say this character that you get as early as possible, or almost as early as possible in Gen 2, that 1 rounds, has a horse, has pursuit, can inherit a brave bow, or not the brave bow, then probably the silver bow or the killer bow at the very least. This unit is not good enough. That is what pretty much Pala Emblem told me when we were doing FE4 tier list review, is, well, actually, Lester is not very good because there's not much demand for a combat unit like him in FE4 Gen 2. Gen 2 plays very differently from Gen 1 in an efficiency context. But for most casual players, Lester is, there's nothing wrong with Lester's combat per se. I guess the fact that he doesn't fight on enemy phase, which is a thing I've surprisingly not really discussed much. It doesn't really come up with a character that's really bad because you kind of don't want them to fight on enemy phase. It is a problem for Midir, but usually, like I said, you have to guard him. For Lester, I think that might be his biggest flaw, is that he can't do enemy phase sweeping, so that's like a big difference between him and, say, Dermot, who joins at the exact same time. Lester, it's pretty hard to make him fight enemies on enemy phase unless he's like at the edge of the range of a mage or something. And even that is not fantastic. It's fine, but if he survives a Dark Mage, for example, Chapter 7, then yeah, he can do that. But it will be his one combat on that enemy phase. It's not great. But he's fine. The biggest problem I've had with Lester, and this is a recent thing, is trying out Lana when Claude is her dad. And that pretty much requires you to completely fuck over Lester and his entire inheritance. He doesn't get any skills anymore, no pursuit, no anything. His strength growth goes down the drain. His only inheritance will be the Valkyrie staff, which he can't use. He's just complete garbage. All he gets is like an existent resistance stat, which is not a worthy trade-off. Worst bow rank as well, I believe. I think he probably still has A rank bows, right? Because he has B rank bows at base, and then the rank from Ideen gets him +1. Yeah, he still has A rank bows. But other than that, Claude just doesn't give him anything he wants. Lana becomes really, really good though. Like Lana with the rescue staff, and Fortify, and Physic, and just high rank magic all around. Super, super nice. But Lester does not appreciate that. So Claude Lester is probably one of the worst combat units in Gen 2. I'm not going to count it against him. This rating is all Midir Lester getting what he needs. But it's still not as good in Gen 2 as it will be in Gen 1. It's kind of odd how a character with all-around better stats than Midir can end up worse, but that's just the context of Gen 2 and combat. If you want to know more about why that is that way, I'd recommend watching the FE4 tier list review. But that's Lester. Next up is the FE5 ones, Robert and Selfina. I think they're just called Bow Knights in this one. So they both joined at the same time, Chapter 9, the Escape chapter, where you have a bunch of Wyvern Knights going after your home base. And I think Selfina can one-round those Wyverns, and Robert cannot, but with the combination of like the 3 scrub horsemen you get at the point, Robert and his friends, you can maybe get there. Maybe you can double them if their stat variance works out. I don't remember exactly. The point is, he's kind of sometimes useful for fighting there, but not very, very handy. He's definitely a growth unit, and Thracia doesn't have a great payoff for growth units unless you just really like your stat screen with a bunch of 20s in it. There's not too much demand for combat units, especially not combat units that use bows, but some places there is some payoff to it in the very late game. But I think that helps Selfina almost more than Robert. I'll get into that when we get into Selfina's rating. But Robert is just kind of like an S. You do have to throw the scrolls on him to make him into that S character, because his growths normally are not good enough to warrant raising him a lot. But at that point, you do have plenty of scrolls to make him good if you really want to. But this is an example of a unit that, in no context whatsoever, is going to be better than many others. The only good thing I can say about him is you get him early enough to where you can fix him if you want to, but the fact that he needs fixing in the first place to become good, and that there's a lack of a combat payoff in Thracia, I think shows a lot. Some other random problems you have to deal with. You have to dismount him indoors. He does still get to keep his primary weapon type in bows, but at the very least, unlike say Brighton or Hicks or Finn, he doesn't have to pick up swords for no reason. He can just keep using bows. Even when promoted, he only uses bows. He has a pretty terrible bow rank. I believe he has just E rank bows with maybe a little bit of like bonus rank on top of it. That can be a bit annoying. His best weapons is probably Iron Bow for a while anyway, just for the accuracy, but it's just kind of an annoying thing for him. I almost wish he could use swords sometimes, so he could use the Paragon Sword and catch up faster, but he doesn't. I suppose if you have your Paragon manual still lying around, you could throw it on him, just to make raising him earlier. I always tell people that are new to Thracia that the Paragon Scroll is like the one thing you can give to almost anyone, and just pick someone you like that you want to train faster and give him Paragon. This could be one of those units. Robert has a movement star as well. It never comes up when you actually need it, but when it does, yo, that's fire right there. So I'll give him like a slightly higher rating than Wolfsetgar. You could argue either way. I think he's not great, obviously, but he's salvageable if you want him to be. Now, Selfina, I think, is very interesting because she is almost a pre-promote. She kind of tries to do the Garrick Cormag thing, where she joins with a Master Seal proof, Knight proof in her inventory. She's almost promotion ready. I believe her base level is like 8 or 9. But you have to be very careful with Selfina because she has a cost, and what that means is that any combat initiated by her or the enemy can be... You can add another round to that combat if at the start of that combat her HP and attack speed is higher than the enemy's. Now those requirements, I'm wording them very specifically because it can be a matter of life and death for her. So let's say she's at full HP, but there's an armor knight near her that has less HP, maybe because he's weakened, maybe he just started with less HP, and obviously armor knights are going to be slower than Selfina. And he comes up to her, hits her with a lance, and then the combat beforehand is checked, and like, oh, the armor knight has less HP, less speed. Okay, let's add another round of combat, and then Selfina just gets doubled by an armor knight and dies. The same can happen with a ballista. It's very weird that a skill you have can work against you like that, but it makes some sense. If you're going to put a cost on a character, it might as well be a bow knight, right? Because on player phase, it's very good to take advantage of. An enemy is there, you're doubling him, but you're not 2-hit KOing him, but a cost adds another round of combat. So now you're quadrupling that enemy. It's pretty good for Selfina when it works out that way. Unfortunately, if you get countered by the enemy, it can be a very risky affair. Let's say you're up against a mage, you're 2-hit KOing him, the mage 2-hit KOs you. If you hit him, and then he hits you, and then you hit him back, he's dead. That's good for you, right? But what if you miss so many times that he gets to counterattack you twice? That's pretty scary. It's not going to happen often. I think you'd have to miss like 2 out of 3 in that scenario for that to happen, but it can happen, and having a chance of death is never a good thing in a Fire Emblem with no turn wheel game. So those are some things you have to be very careful with Selfina. There's a payoff though. Again, a shout outs to a random playthrough that I saw. Lolo's FE5 Iron Man LTC ranked playthrough had Selfina as one of the characters planned for the final chapter. I think she needed Selfina to get 1 strength proc and a promotion, if I recall correctly, to near guaranteed 1 round, 1 armor knight or 1 dark mage in the final chapter. Having a bow knight like that in the final chapter is nice because a lot of the combat takes place through doors or walls. You don't always have time to open up a door in there and then fight the enemy. If you've played the chapter, it makes sense, right? If you haven't, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil it for you. But it's just nice to have a ranged attack indoors there. And Selfina, just like Robert, keeps her bows indoors, so she can do that kind of stuff. And it's probably easier to get her to that point than it is to get Robert to that point, or Ronan, or Tanya, because Selfina starts further ahead. But Selfina's growths are not very good, so it will take some time before she gets that strength proc she needs. If you want her stats to become good, then it will take a while for her to maybe get there if you get unlucky. But generally speaking, Selfina is going to be fairly low investments and fairly high payoff when you do need a character like her, but she's not very good. You should make sure to keep her alive even if you're not using her, because she also talks to Glade in chapter 13 to get the Brave Bow from him in a talk conversation. And even if you're not using Selfina, the Brave Bow is just nice to have. She is one of the better users of it, just because very few other people have the rank for it. I want to say the next person you get to actually use it at base is like Xavier. Actually, I think Selfina doesn't even use it at base. No, I think she does. Either way, she's one of the best users of the weapon. It's very heavy, but having the Brave effect can be quite nice, even if you're getting weighed down a ton. So I'll throw her in C tier for now. I think she's arguably better than Lester, but in fact, I think she's definitely better than Lester. Actually, we can throw Lester in here for now. So my original list had it like this, but thinking about it now, I actually think it's more like this. Yeah, you can go either way. Because the way I'm talking about it now, it feels like Selfina's better. Alright, GBA time. Sue is joining in chapter 6, and I looked up Sue's base stats because I've kind of come around a little bit on Sue, as good as she is. The way I used to see it is that Sue is better than Sin on normal mode, and then Sin just like outstats her greatly on hard mode. But I looked at Sue's stats again, and they're really not that good. In fact, if you compare her to Dorothy, and leaving out the movement for a moment, just looking at their pure combat, they're really similar. They're way too similar for Sue to be like really good. She's fine. Like, Sue is a perfectly usable unit just because this class is just so good. Especially in FE6, where Wyverns are a common enemy type. Pegasi are a very common enemy type in certain parts of the game. Just being able to avoid counterattacks is pretty huge in these games. It hasn't come up a whole lot in raiding these units, again, because like most of them are kind of... but for FE6 specifically, it's just nice to be able to avoid the counterattack from... Often you see like killer weapons, reaver weapons, even steel weapons are fairly common and not nice to take a hit from. Sue would be worse if she was locked to 1 range. You much prefer her to be ranged at 2 range. The problem with Sue is just her strength is really bad. She has like 5 base, 30 growth in chapter 6. Sure, she levels up faster than most characters because she's level 1. But also she's level 1 and it'll take her a while to get to promotion. And I feel like for nomads, it's pretty much fine for them to get to level 10 and then promote. just to unlock the extra point of movement, get more weapon rank in. That is her one big advantage over Sin and many other units, is she's able to use the killer bow before most other units can. The killer bow does weigh her down a bit, but her speed is good enough to double with it usually, not always. The big weird thing with the nomads, and especially for Sin, is that using a nomad more than you use your Pegasi makes you go the Sakai route, which is arguably worse because it's harder and the enemy types are harder. This is really tough to rate because A, it feels more like a game mechanic than it's part of the units themselves. B, you could just use the Pegasi, which are decent enough units to get away with, that it might not matter at all. But the fact that you have to manage their levels is kind of a hassle. And C, yeah, the route is harder, but is it bad to go to a harder route per se? I guess you're making the game harder for yourself. I do think Sakai is legit enough of a pain to avoid, especially 20x is just such a massive grind to get through, and because the fact that it's RNG based, which gate you have to seize is just so annoying. No one likes FE6 guidance, but at least 20x doesn't kill me as badly. 20x in Ilya has no reinforcements whatsoever. You just take your time, get through the walls, it's fine. It's kind of boring, but at least it's not the Sakai version, right? That's the best thing you can say about it. And avoiding that at all costs would be nice. But if you're both using Su and Sin, you'll probably go to Sakai, and that doesn't feel great. Then again, if you're going to Sakai, then Su and Sin become pretty good units in those chapters because the most common enemy types are nomads, and they can counter those. So for one, they have a good enemy phase to work with now. So you can have them counter enemy nomad troopers, and I think Sin in particular is very adept at dealing with those. Su, I'm not so sure on if she's good at that. It's been a while since I've tried her on a hard mode. I would say she's probably able to counter them at least without dying, but that's kind of where it ends for her probably. So I think Su is okay, but I wouldn't rate her very highly because of all these statistical problems she has. And yeah, I'm probably going to put her like the bottom of C. I think there was a video recently, I think Raisins was in it, and Jonabo. They were talking about Su a fair bit, but I haven't watched that one yet, I just know it exists. So if you're looking for more Su literature, I guess it's out there for you as well. Sin is like if Su had good stats and joined a bit later. His bases are insane. He might be the best unit on this list. Harbor bonuses are probably a big part of it, but even on normal mode I find that Sin's bases are just very nice to have around. He's so fast, has enough strength to, with maybe a couple procs here and there, to KO enemies, especially if he gets a killer bow going. The big weakness for Sin, did I say weakness correctly? I don't think I did. The big weakness for Sin is that his bow rank is D at base, and in order for him to use killer bows, he'll have to get 50 weapon XP, and FE6 weapon rank grinding is always a bit difficult. Don did it for his FE6 run, so it's not the biggest hassle ever. It just means that this killer bow is sitting around in your inventory and you can't use it. Another funny thing that's come up for me with Sin personally is that I would forget to buy enough iron bows for him. And so when he runs out of the stupid short bow, I have like no good weapons to give him. But that's a me problem. You probably prepared better than I did. Just buy an iron bow in chapter 7. Don't make it weird. Or buy one in chapter 9 if you can. I don't know. The point is, better make sure you have enough bows for him. But again, that's a me problem. But, you know, Sin doubles at base, which is a pretty rare thing for FE6 characters. Also just avoids counters, which is a good thing in FE6. He gets swords when he promotes. I don't think any of these other units did yet, except like the Shadow Dragon horsemen. But, you know, they're weird anyway because reclassing. They're not even bow knights most of the time. But Sin being able to use swords, I don't think is a big deal. If you're like in the middle of a bunch of brigands, like if you're in chapter 14, like you're holding him back so you can fight the brigand reinforcements there. Like the Berserker duo, then I guess him having a sword is kind of nice, but other than that, I don't really find it very useful for him to use an iron sword, and getting it beyond the iron sword takes a lot of work, so it's mostly just about using the strongest bows you can find. I do think being able to use the S-rank bow is a big deal. There's not many other units that can really claim that. I think Igren and Klein are very good units to have for a portion of the game, but getting them to S-rank bows and using them all game long is usually a bit longer than I would like to, but Sin, you want to use them all game long once you've trained him. You kind of want to avoid Ilya, but other than that, you want to go there. So having someone that has 8 move, plus however many boots you can buy for him, and then being able to use a 2-range divine weapon is pretty unheard of, honestly. Like, who else can even do that? You could give Lena a bunch of boots and have her use 4 blades like that, but you can recognize that that's not the same, right? And before you get boots, like still having an 8-move unit, being able to hit stuff with a longbow if need be, that's so much attacking range. It's really flexible how nice he is. And it's also nice how flexible he is, of course, just like my grammar here. So Sin is absolutely amazing. I have one more dumb anecdote for Sin I want to share before I forget. Back when we discussed Fire Emblem tiering and we talked about how to rate units and everything, there was this idea that you always had to rank units according to how much they helped your actual ranking in the game. So stuff like XP rank and tactics rank. And XP goes up if you are lower level. So what some people would propose doing is, well, yeah, Sin is pretty bad for making you go to Sakai, but what if you don't use him and then you bring him to Ilia as a level 5 nomad and start shooting down Pegasus Knights? You get a bunch of experience and you get to train Sin. Of course, his bases at that point are pretty bad, so he's probably only going to be able to snipe Pegasus Knights with some degree of efficiency. But it's a pretty funny idea that I remembered just now that it existed. Of course, you still have to deal with the fact that he has D-rank bows at that point. You'd much rather be able to use killer bows at that point in the game, but it was a funny idea. So we'll throw him in A tier. I think this is it might be one of the only A tiers. It's hard to justify a Bow Knight getting an S rank, just because these units are rarely really able to MVP their way through an entire chapter, like someone like, I don't know, Seth would or something. Like the S tier I just reserved for really overpowered units, and I put some Jagans in there, and I probably put some other guys in there that I thought were really good, but it's really hard to say, oh, this Bow Knight just carried me for this entire chapter. Even if the entire enemy army is bows, it's really hard for them to do that, because they tend to have lower defenses as well. But this is probably the closest we can get. Wrath, I feel like he has a very similar stat build to Sin. He's just in a game with worse enemies, and that means that other units are able to deal with those enemies more efficiently than he can, because he can never have both 1 range and 2 range. In addition, he just joins a fair bit later, relatively speaking, to other characters. He joins in like 22 chapters. If we just ignore Limb Mode for a moment, which we don't have to with Wrath, but if we ignore Limb Mode for a moment, he joins like 12 plus some guidance chapters in, while most units in FE7 join earlier than that, and most units here even join earlier than that, relatively speaking. So he has availability counting against him a little bit here. And even if you try to use him in Limb Mode, he's probably not going to get a whole lot of levels because he doesn't get much XP. In fact, he probably gets higher level just by being in starting in Hector mode, or you can play Limb Mode, kill Wrath off, and then he will rejoin at a higher level, because if you kill a unit in Limb Mode, they should in theory rejoin, or at least that doesn't go for anyone, but it does go for Wallace and Wrath, right? So if you kill off Wrath, then he joins at level 9 in Hector Heart mode, and that makes him easier to get to level 10 and promote him, or you can keep him unpromoted for a little bit longer and train him. We have a whole race on the channel, Raisins and I, where we had to get Wrath to level 20 Nomad Trooper and kill the final boss with him. Quite a fun race to do. Would recommend watching. I notice I'm plugging my other videos quite a lot here, but these anecdotes just keep coming up. But yeah, Wrath is quite strong. Like, his strength and skill and speed are all very good. FE7 doesn't have a very high demand for player phase combat like he offers, but his movement type is very nice. He can take less terrain penalties from stuff like forests and snow and weird things like that, and every now and then it comes up, and it's just nice that he can do that. Similarly with his weapons, sometimes you need to snipe a guy with a brave bow, sometimes you need to use a longbow somewhere. It might come up like once per chapter for the rest of his availability, but every time you're going to be grateful that you're using him. And replacing him with someone like an unpromoted or even a promoted Cavalier tends not to be better than having someone who can specifically do the things that he does. It's very weird how he works out, but I think in the end, it's worth throwing him somewhere in B tier. I would say he's worse than Medir overall, but every time it comes up, I'm just super grateful that I have him. Sacred Stones doesn't have someone who joins with a bow and a horse at once. You can promote Naomi to Ranger if you're Forgo Sniper, which you probably want to do, but I already rated her in the Archer tier list, and I didn't think it was right to have her here just for that exception. Hayden sure exists. I don't even really want to rank him, because what is Hayden even? Like, he joins in a creature campaign somewhere. I think he's one of the last characters to join. I think we were talking about this in the FE8 creature campaign video, and yeah, he just kind of is there in a mode where you probably have better characters around, and how good he is really just depends on how many stat pushes you want to feed him from the shop, how many stat pushes you fed to everyone else. You probably have 8 characters better than him, which probably means you don't have any room for deployment for him. He's just a bonus character. I feel like he's worth more as a collectible than as a unit you actually deploy. His stats really aren't very good for that point in the game. Like, if you throw him base level Hayden against, say, the Draco Zombies on the last floor of the Ruins, or any of the characters before it, it's been a while since I've even tried, but my gut says he's not going to stand out at the very least. If you actually used Hayden ever, let me know if I'm wrong here, but I don't think I am. You also won't have any supports for that's worth, which I thought was a big missed opportunity with the creature campaign characters. They have relations to the cast already. Why not give them like 1 or 2 funny supports to work with? And Hayden is still alive by the end of FFA. He might be one of the very few characters that you recruit that you get in Sacred Stone's creature campaign that is canonically still alive at that point. Almost everyone else has been killed. But alas, he wasn't there. So I'm gonna leave him here. Now we get to Astrid. Her FE9 incarnation is obviously the better one, and probably one of the best characters on this list as well. I don't know if I would rank her as high as Sin, but she is at least probably the best B tier character here. She joins very bad. Like, she gets like one-rounded by enemies if you don't shove Ike 3 times to get to her in time. I think that's one of the most common questions asked in like the new question threads on like the Fire Emblem subreddit. It's like, hey, Astrid died, I got a game over? Or Astrid died, how do I get the Night Ward now? What do I do? And the answer is just shove Ike a couple times. I think there's even a base conversation that tells you to do that. But anyway, if you do get her, then getting her kills is very easy. The map that she joins in is a defend map, so you don't have to speed up your like gameplay for any reason. So there's no efficiency disincentive to not feed her some kills if you think it's going to help you more than doing it the other way around. As long as you can plan it properly and reliably, it doesn't really hurt you to feed Astrid a couple wyverns or ravens. Same thing really, threatening enemy flyers that are a pain in the ass to kill sometimes. FE9 does only have double effectiveness, and Astrid doesn't really have any better options than the Iron Bow, I don't believe. So it might not be easy for her to get the kills like quickly, but I find that usually there is a way to do that. I find that Archanea, for example, can be made to not one-round enemy ravens, and then Astrid can pick them up. Depends on your units, of course. So that's one thing you can do. Because she has Paragon, she's so on a level, she gets so much XP. I think she gets near a full level, or like an actual full level from killing a raven. Bonus experience also works with Paragon and FE9, so you can give that to her if you want to. It is a resource cost, but with Astrid the cost is lower than raising other unleveled units, and the benefit of Bexping her over someone who's on par with levels like, I don't know, Oscar, is you just get so many more level ups for your buck, right? So it's way easier to get Astrid caught up than it is to get Oscar like 5 more levels or whatever it is that would give him a meaningful advantage. So I think in a fishing context, there's definitely room for using Astrid. And, you know, again, there's not many other paladins there's not many other units that use bows as a main weapon, so once she gets enough weapon rank to use higher rank bows, she can do things that other paladins, even once trained, cannot do. You probably won't have a high bow rank of, like, on Oscar or on Kieran, and Archanea can't even use bows, neither can your flyers. So sometimes there's a case for Astrid just brave bowing someone down that no one else could. These situations do come up very rarely in FE9 because the enemy quality is still garbo, but it's there. And, you know, Night Ward also just works very well with Paragon. Just getting more speed level ups like that is very easy. Oscar probably got most of his levels before he got the Night Ward, but Astrid can have the Night Ward for all of her levels, so her speed growth is, I think, in a way better than it's suggested on a stat screen. That said, she does have a cost of using. It does take her a while to get going, and the best chapters for paladins are probably behind her, while the worst chapters for paladins are probably ahead of her. Think like the chapter where you have a bunch of rocks rolling down from the top of the hill, or I think the desert chapter is still after that too. So there's a couple chapters where her horse doesn't really help her very much, but there's still enough chapters for her to contribute that I think having her in B tier at least is worth it. Again, if we were just counting more casual playthroughs, I would put Wolf and Sitkar ahead of her, but I'm not, so I'm going to put Astrid ahead instead. FE10 Astrid has bigger problems, and that's that the game is kind of built at hating mounted units, and also it's kind of built around hating Astrid. Her bases are terrible, and her accuracy is bad, and you should feel bad when using her. I did finally have a first go at using Astrid on my last FE10 Iron Man playthrough, and I found her surprisingly salvageable, but the fact that she has to be salvaged in the first place, again, I think says a lot about the unit. Sometimes people in the past will bring up the unholy trinity of bad units in FE10, and I think they would usually be referring to Astrid, Fiona, and Meg, and or Lyre. I guess they're like an unholy quartet. You can argue about which one of these units is the least redeemable or the most annoying to catch up, but the fact that she was even mentioned in that conversation, I think, says enough about her. She does have redeeming qualities, though, sometimes. She's one of the few units in FE10 Crimean Royal Knights that can take kills in 2-3, Geoffrey's Charge, and get reasonable experience for it because the enemies are like tier 1, but she has Paragon and is locked to her. No one else can take it away from her, so might as well. Like, if Joffrey kills an enemy, he gets 2 experience for it. It would be 1, but he has Paragon, so he gets 2. But Astrid would get, like, I don't know, 30? It's been a while since I've done it, but I did it on my Iron Man, and it was surprisingly... It took a long while for her to catch up. There was a lot of grinding involved as well, a lot of slowing down and doing it, but number 1, it was just fun to do. It was fun to catch her up, and number 2, I feel like this is less of a pain than training Fiona in a much more demanding chapter like the Dawn Brigade chapters. So I think she kind of has that going for her as far as like bat units go. That said, I'm still going to put her in E tier. I'm still going to put her here. Probably even... E tier is just splitting hairs at this point. Because she has so much catching up to do. Especially because once 2-3 is over and you get to 3-9, the Crimean Royal Knight chapter in part 3. I forgot what it's called. But you know what I mean, right? The one where the houses are burning down. That's pretty much what she does. She douses houses. She like does chip damage every now and then. But she has such bad accuracy every now and then. She's not even reliable at helping you get that 1 HP of damage that you need. And that's often... She doesn't really do a whole lot more than 1 damage. It might be 3, it might be 5, but it's definitely single digit. You can give her a stronger weapon, I guess, if you want to buy it for her, but I feel like gold is better used on other things. I know I usually have like a steel longbow at that point. I think it's from our joining inventory. That's really funny to get to see your accuracy go down the drain. It's just so sad. But, you know, if you want to use Astrid, you can let her keep Paragon at no capacity cost, because if you never take the skill off, then it doesn't cost any capacity. You can give her something else. You can give her, like, I guess you could do Blossom. I don't really like Blossom Paragon that much in FE10, but it does increase her growth technically. But I think it just slows her down too much to be worth it, especially in hard mode. I think I would go with something dumb like Celerity. Just might as well go all out on the meme, right? Just go with Celerity or Adept or something for higher chance of not hitting. Or higher chance of not missing, I suppose you should say. There's probably something else you can give her that's not Blossom that's better. But anyway, the point is, she can be raised, it's fun. Double Bow Astrid is hilarious. Would try it every day, but god, they really ruined her stats. Alright, final unit to rank here is Fogado. Fogado is hilarious. I almost forgot him, but then I remembered that I used him on my easy mode run of Engage. And damn, this guy is fast and strong. I love using him. I gave him the Shining Bow, so a bit of bias here because the Shining Bow is one of the best weapons. So maybe what I'm doing here is just ranking the Shining Bow rather than Fogado. But while I don't, like, he's one of the better pre-promotes in the game. There are pre-promotes that are just, like, ruining the game or, like, trivializing it sometimes, it feels like Kagetsu and Ivy. They're definitely a class above him. They're, like, the S tiers. But I think Fogado is, like, the next bit, like, big thing. I would say he's worse than Pandreo, for example, too. He's another, like, really big player. But he's definitely better than, like, a lot of the other ones. I think Panette is better than him. But for example, he's better than BOWNAGE, of course, by far. But he might be the next best one. I'm trying to think of like what other ones you get in Engage. But he definitely felt very good to just use that base. Very little resources needed, just very strong. I guess I kind of think of him as like what you can get if you trained Alchrist and or Etier. But instead, you put less in. You probably get less out of it too because they have other advantages, like higher strength or whatever. But Fogado by himself, for what you put in, what you get out of him is just very, very good. So I really enjoyed using him. I just kept him as a base class with the Shining Bow because I think he had higher magic that way, but you can definitely just go Warrior Fogado, do something else. I don't think that's necessarily the best way to use him, but he seems pretty good to me. Some people might rank him here instead or even lower than that. But the little things you have to put into him in a game like Engage where resource consumption is a pretty big deal, I think that's pretty nice. So I'm just going to throw him here. Have some bias here because I like Fogado a lot. But yeah, he seems pretty powerful. So, that's the ranking. That's my Bow Knight tier list. If I forgot any other archetype, again, let me know in the comments down below, and I'll get back into these. Because honestly, this was really fun to do once again. It's been a while since I've done one of these archetype tier lists. So, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!